The number of casualties on the Indian side as far as that standoff, those violent clashes at the Galwan Valley on Monday night is concerned, have now officially been confirmed as increased from 3 to 20 by the Indian Army. The country is mourning loss of lives of at least 20 Indian Army men, and these numbers could still go up because some reports suggest that more Jawans are considered as critical. So what happens really? What is the way forward from here? There are sources that suggest that casualties have also been inflicted upon the Chinese side. But remember, there has been no confirmation as far as those numbers are concerned, either from the government, from the ruling party in Beijing, or the Chinese PLA itself. And to talk about these developments, I'm joined here by Ambassador Ashok Kantha. He was the former ambassador, the Indian ambassador to China, and is currently the director for the Institute of Chinese Studies. Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to ETV Bharat. If I may begin with, for the longest time now, because these are clashes that we have now seen that have caused loss of lives, they're the first in 45 years. And for all these decades now, the constant sort of argument was that, look, compared to the LOC, the LSC, or the line of actual control, has been relatively calm, stable, no bullets fired. Now, in these clashes also, no shots may have been fired, but there are horrific, gruesome details of the way the soldiers were killed. Would you say that the LSC has changed completely here on now, and we cannot refer to that LSC situation where we were saying that things were peaceful, at least on the border with China?
Clearly, something extremely unfortunate has happened. As you mentioned, for the last 45 years, despite problems we have with regard to alignment to line of actual control in international boundary, working together, India and China had ensured that the LAC remained relatively peaceful, and there were no incidents resulting in loss of life on either side since 1975. That's behind us. Now, we need to look at how to move ahead from this present situation, which is serious. It's extremely serious. We should not downplay seriousness of present predicament we are in. I think what needs to be done, first of all, is to see that there's no further escalation. We should not rule that out. In fact, even earlier, when the standoff situation us had mentioned that there's always risk of accident taking place when you have armed personnel face to face over an extended period, and that's what has happened day for yesterday evening. So first of all, I think there's need for very clear political directive going from both sides to respective border guarding forces to try and ensure that situation is de-escalated as soon as possible. And then we have to take a series of steps to see that the situation is brought back under control once again, which it is not at this point of time.
So, but the de-escalation process, as you mentioned, it's going to be very, very complex here on, given the high number of casualties that we're talking about. The men on the ground are going to be absolutely emotional, sensitive. The tempers are going to be very, very volatile. I mean, there are club sticks that have been used. There are apparently bats that have been used. So the situation could pretty much worsen off from here, instead of actually seeing, though the Indian Army statement does say that the disengagement is now complete in Galwan Valley, but there is a serious chance of a major flare-up across the other points also, where the standoff has been continuing since early May.
I will not rule out, flare-up at some point or other along the line of actual control. I'm reasonably confident that both sides would like to see that the flare-up doesn't result into a broader conflict. In fact, both India and China invested a lot in maintaining peace and tranquility in broader areas. As you're aware, we have put in place a fairly elaborate architecture of CBMs, confidence building measures, the standard operating procedures to see that border areas remain peaceful. Clearly, that hasn't worked in this case. So we need to do some introspection. We need to take some immediate steps. These immediate steps, as I mentioned earlier, first of all, is a clear message going down that there should not be any further escalation. Number two, I think the process of de-escalation and disengagement must continue, and it should be brought to its logical conclusion. And that logical conclusion will be restoration of status quo ante. We cannot accept a situation where Chinese side is allowed to retain gains made through unilateral action taken by them since April this year. So I think that is very important. Restoration of situation as it existed in April before we had recent set of incidents. And then, we need to review SOPs, standard operating procedures we have, see what went wrong, and equally important, we need to look ahead and take some remedial measures. I think this is something we have been talking about for a long time, that we cannot accept the present situation where there is great deal of ambiguity about the alignment to line of actual control. We must clarify and confirm the LAC. We have formal understanding in this regard. We had agreed to exchange maps and move towards a common understanding of the LAC. Chinese side has stalemated that process over the last 18 years. I think this should be a wake-up call. We must resume that process. And finally, can we really live with a situation indefinitely where we have such major differences on the boundary question? I think the task given to two special representatives since 2003 has been to find a political settlement to the boundary question. They made some good breakthrough initially in 2005 when we agreed on, guiding principles and political parameters of boundary settlement. Since then, there has been no breakthrough. I think they need to revert to the original mandate and see, this is not a problem we can put on the back burner indefinitely. If we do that, we'll pay a price through horrific incidents like what happened day before yesterday.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of discussion happening now whether these existing protocol and mechanisms are already, in fact, past their shelf life and we need to look at new ones. But Ambassador, the one important point...
If I come in there, sorry
yes,
to interject you. No, I don't think these operating procedures or confidence building measures are past their shelf life. That's not the case. I have been intimately involved in negotiating, some of them, and I can tell you that they're excellent CBMs. What is missing is proper implementation of those CBMs. I think we should not throw the baby with the bathwater. We should stick to the CBMs we have with the renewed commitment on both sides to respect them. We must scrupulously respect the line of actual control as we are committed to do.
Right. So the important point that you are emphasizing upon, that there has to be clear-cut political directives and messaging there from the top. Do you think following these casualties, is it all the more important that there needs to be a direct conversation between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi, who also agreed to that informal summit-level mechanism post the Doklam standoff in 2017? Or do you think now is not the time for these two leaders to just pick up that phone and make a call?
No. Without knowing full facts, I would not like to hazard a suggestion that Prime Minister Modi should pick up the phone and speak to President Xi. But there is definitely need for contacts at a fairly high level through diplomatic channels. It's useful to have meetings between border commanders, but we have always felt that that channel, though useful, is not adequate. So we need to have more contacts at the diplomatic level, at the political level. It could be perhaps a conversation at the level of special representatives of two countries who are tasked to look after the border issue. I don't know, it's not for me to suggest at what level, but clearly there is a need for contact at political and diplomatic level.
But so going by your own experience, do you really think that, it is the political directive that does trickle down when it comes to the local commanders on the ground? Is there a communication gap? Because in this instance, most of the experts that we have spoken to, including people like General D.S. Huda or Jaidev Ranade, they seem to suggest that these intrusions this time around were coordinated, were pre-planned, and at least directed from the Western Theatre Command of the PLA itself, if not higher up. So if that is the case, I mean, where is really the reconciliation between the political directives and what the military men do on the ground?
I have no doubt about the fact that these are not localized incidents. Set of intrusions and border incidents that we have seen since 5th of May, it has been across a very wide frontage from Sikkim sector to Western sector. Clearly, we wouldn't have that many incidents at multiple locations taking place without a decision at a very high level in the Chinese hierarchy. So there is a decision on the Chinese side, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Chinese side there's no interest in ensuring that there is restoration of a measure of peace and tranquility along border areas. I would like to reiterate that, like us, the Chinese side is also invested in ensuring relative peace in border areas. And it's time for us to retrieve a difficult situation. We have to understand that we have a very complex and complicated relationship with China. But in the past, we have ensured that, despite problems, relations remain by and large on even keel. I think this time again we need to do that.
So, but while the Chinese may be interested in peace and tranquility at the border, is clarification and confirmation of the LAC something that really suits them? Because we've seen their hesitation at different levels over the years, and it's a largely argued theory that perhaps a LAC that is in a state of flux, in a way, works for them in trying to keep India pinned with its problems on its borders.
No, I agree with you that the Chinese side has shown a deliberate proclivity to maintain ambiguity regarding the alignment of line of action control. That suits them. In fact, that's why despite a formal understanding, a written agreement between two sides to move towards a common understanding of the line of action control, they have stalemated the process LAC clarification and confirmation over last 18 years. But I think this message needs to be reiterated very forcefully to Chinese side that if we wish to keep India-China relations moving ahead in a relatively positive direction, border areas must remain peaceful. I think this is a key understanding between two sides that peaceful borders is an essential prerequisite for ensuring that India-China relations remain constructive. I think that understanding needs to be reiterated, and we should do that forcefully.
So just the last two questions. You said that it's important that restoration of the status quo ante be there, and that's been one of, in fact, the talking points between the military commanders during the discussions. Yesterday, there was a statement put out by the spokesperson, a senior colonel of the Western Theatre Command of the PLA, who said that the sovereignty over the entire Galwan River has always been ours. Clearly, and the MEA has also in its statement said that China is trying to alter the status quo. So given that, if you do think that that is actually one of their main motives here, will they actually agree to a restoration of status quo ante?
No, Smita, what we need to understand that line of actual control is not about sovereignty. It's about, a given position, and its existing LAC, what exists on the ground. That's why, both sides are committed not to alter the line of actual control as it exists. Now, what Chinese are doing in recent weeks is to alter the LAC. What happened yesterday, if you look at the statement put out by spokesman of Ministry of External Affairs, that the incident resulted from the Chinese action to alter the status quo in Galwan River Valley. Notwithstanding consensus that was reached between border commanders on 6th of June. So I think respecting status quo, not allowing status quo to be altered, it's a very important requirement. That's why I'm a little worried about when we talk of some media reports talk about buffer zone, which will be on our side of the LAC. I don't think we should accept any restrictions on patrolling, which we have been undertaking hitherto on our side of the LAC. So it should not only be restoration status quo in terms of Chinese personnel moving back to their side of the LAC, but also no restriction on patrolling on our side, no hindering of patrolling on our side, no restriction on development of border infrastructure on our side. I think those are also very important requirements.
Right. So one final question then, former National Security Advisor Shiv Shankar Menon in a recent interview, in fact, mentioned that while these kind of negotiations cannot be done in the public eye or through media, But at the same time, if there is a deafening silence, more often than not, it could send out a wrong signal to the Chinese that a lot more things are acceptable, and India needs to make it clear as to what exactly are the red lines and what is non-negotiable. You having been in the positions of negotiation yourself, tell us from your personal experience at this point in time, what may be happening in terms of the, the lines being dialed, the conversations happening.
No, one thing I'll agree with Ambassador Shivshankar Menon that these negotiations are sensitive in nature. They cannot be conducted through media. At the same time, there is need for greater transparency. I think our side of the story also needs to be put out. You cannot, as someone who has been a practitioner, who has handled these issues in the past, I am fully aware of the fact that there are limits beyond which we cannot share in public domain facts of the case. But there has to be better communication from our side. I think that's important. Also to see that we prevent speculation based on leaks, based on ignorance. A lot of that has happened this time. That's avoidable.
But given that Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping held at least 14 meetings since the time that Mr. Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister, be it bilateral meetings, informal summits, multilateral summits, he's already had 5 visits to China. Should this be questioned in terms of whether the diplomacy on China has succeeded or failed, or is that not a right question to ask? And how important is a public message that needs to go out from the top leadership in the country at this point?
No, I believe it has been very useful to maintain contacts at the level of Prime Minister Modi and President Xi. Engagement at the highest level has contributed to ensuring that India-China relations, which are inherently complicated, complex, and difficult, remain on even keel. Though we have seen ups and downs in relationship. At present, we are going through a period of a serious dip in relations. But I believe political engagement is extremely important, and we should not question that.
Okay, appreciate you joining us with all those perspectives, Ambassador Ashok Kantha. We can only hope that the army Jawans, as far as the Indian army men are concerned, who are still reportedly critically injured, that they are able to pull through, that they recover, and that the situation from this point in time across the different, in fact, standoff points at the LAC sees some sort of a de-escalation and disengagement between the two troops. India, as a responsible democracy, of course, is putting out those number of casualties on our side. But China, of course, being a different kind of a one-party regime, can afford to not be open and transparent about what really transpired in terms of casualties on their side. Many thanks, sir, for joining us in this conversation.
Good talking to you. Thank you.
And if all of you also tuned in here in New Delhi, this is Smita Sharma for ETV Bharat.